Although the two women are separated in age by 56 years, the Queen and Kate share key qualifications for the job, including quiet stoicism, discretion, and firm loyalty.
For years, the private reflections of Queen Elizabeth II had been kept under careful guard, hidden away from both public eyes and even some within the royal circle. But eventually, a choice was made by Princess Anne to break that silence, and what was revealed about Catherine, Princess of Wales, left both King Charles and Prince William in a state of quiet disbelief. The succession had long been assumed to follow the expected course. First, Charles would ascend, followed in due time by William. The sequence was accepted as natural and uncontested, a continuation of the royal line that had always appeared so stable from the outside. The public believed everything was settled. But on one fog-drenched evening in London, behind the thick private walls of Buckingham Palace, a moment unfolded that altered that understanding in a way few could have imagined, and hardly anyone beyond those ancient gates was made aware of it. It began not with fanfare or royal declarations, but with Princess Anne, the figure so often seen as the embodiment of quiet consistency. Known for her composure and her resistance to the trappings of royal drama, she had earned respect both within the family and among the public. Yet beneath her usual reserve, a burden had been carried. A deeply personal responsibility had been entrusted to her, and it had become clear that the time had come to finally share it. The burden had not been chosen, but it had been accepted. It had come in the form of a written message, handwritten by the Queen herself before her passing. It had not been intended for wide circulation or for any official pronouncement. Rather, it had been penned with the deliberate care of a woman who had witnessed generations rise and fall, and who understood the monarchy's survival depended on more than tradition. This letter had been passed to Anne with one simple instruction: to hold it until the moment felt right. Contained within that letter was a wish, a final hope. And when its contents were eventually disclosed, the impact was profound. Names that many had expected to see, Charles, William, had been absent. Instead, a different name had been given focus. The Queen, in her final reflections, had chosen to place her trust in Catherine, the Princess of Wales, not merely as a consort or royal figurehead, but as the individual she believed could secure the very future of the monarchy. On that particular night, as a blanket of fog pressed against the palace gates, the mood inside was hushed and heavy. The decision was made by Anne to summon only two others, King Charles and Prince William. No advisors had been notified, no assistants brought in. It was to be an intimate, private moment, shared only among the three most personally affected by what was to come. The room in which they met carried the solemn weight of history. Portraits of monarchs past gazed down from dark wooden walls, their expressions frozen in time. The silence was not filled with explanation or argument. Anne simply retrieved the carefully folded letter, its edges softened from repeated readings, and placed it gently on the table between them. It was King Charles who reached for it first, his movements noticeably measured. Prince William leaned forward soon after, his attention fixed on every line. The words were read in silence, not once but several times, as the clock on the mantel marked each passing second with almost exaggerated clarity. Within the letter, Queen Elizabeth had expressed a deeply held belief. She had seen in Catherine not just a dutiful wife or beloved public figure, but the person most capable of embodying the strength, grace, and modern sensibility that the monarchy would require in order to endure. In her view, it was not a man who would hold the royal house together in the years to come. It was a woman, already known to and trusted by the people, who had won hearts through quiet sincerity and consistent action. No immediate response was offered. The shock was not loud, but it was unmistakably present. A shift had occurred, and it had left the air in the room unsteady. It was King Charles who eventually spoke first, his voice low and touched with resistance. There had been a quiet tension in his words, an acknowledgement that the monarchy had always followed a certain path, and that what had been presented now stood outside those long-held lines. William remained silent at first. His expression was still, but his hands betrayed his inner conflict, alternating between clenched and relaxed as he processed what had been laid before him. No confrontation followed. Anne had not gathered them to provoke disagreement. She had been chosen by the Queen for a reason, not to argue, but to honor a final trust. And in her heart, that choice had long since been understood and accepted. Catherine, it had become clear to her, was not simply suited for a role within the monarchy. She was quietly becoming the reason many still believed in it. When William finally did speak, his question was soft and strained by emotion. It carried with it the unspoken weight of years spent living under intense scrutiny and expectation. A realization had dawned that the future he had long thought of as his might not unfold the way he had imagined. To that, Anne responded not with certainty, but with calm. The timing, she implied, had not been an oversight. Perhaps the Queen had simply known that a moment would come when the truth could be understood, not as a threat, but as a reflection of trust, placed not in a title, but in a person. And with that, something unspoken settled in the room. A shift had occurred, not just within the palace, but within the very fabric of what the monarchy might one day become. Not through declarations or proclamations, but through a quiet letter, a quiet meeting, and a quiet understanding that history, however carefully planned, sometimes changes course on a whisper. The room fell into silence once more. The three of them sat there, surrounded by the weight of the moment, each fully aware that whatever decision they made next would alter the course of everything. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that only moments of profound consequence could create. What had been discussed, what had been revealed, would not simply remain contained within those walls. It would ripple outward, reshaping everything they knew. Meanwhile, just a short distance away within the palace, Catherine remained completely unaware of the monumental conversations unfolding just a few rooms away. Having finished tucking George, Charlotte, and Louis into bed, she now sat quietly by the window. Her cup of tea had long since grown cold beside her, untouched as her gaze lingered on the dense fog outside. She felt an unease stirring within her, a faint discomfort that she couldn't place, though she would never have guessed that, in the very heart of the palace, her future, and the future of the monarchy itself, was being dramatically rewritten. Catherine had never sought power. She had never yearned for grandeur or a crown. All she had ever wanted was to fulfill her role with grace, dignity, and a quiet strength. She smiled when the situation called for it, listened intently when it was needed, and fiercely protected her children like a lioness defending her cubs. This was the woman she was, the woman who had captured the heart of a nation, but more importantly, the heart of the Queen. Queen Elizabeth had recognized that very essence in Catherine. She had seen in her the kind of strength the monarchy would need to thrive, not just survive. A quiet power, built not from titles or grand gestures, but from sincerity and the ability to connect with others. And so, in the letter that lay between them, the Queen had quietly placed her faith in Catherine, believing her to be the woman who could guide the future of the crown. In the darkened room, the letter now lay like a spark ready to ignite. The words within it were not just a message, they were a decision, a path forward, waiting to be embraced. It was Anne who finally rose. She smoothed the fabric of her skirt, composed and measured as always. Without waiting for any further discussion, without a word from either Charles or William, she moved decisively. There was no need for approval. The decision had already been made within her. She understood what her mother had wanted, and she knew what had to be done. The truth, though difficult, needed to be revealed. The risk had to be taken. Her voice, calm but firm, broke the stillness. She spoke with the gravity of someone who had witnessed history unfold, someone who understood that they stood on the precipice of something that could never be undone. Her words were simple but powerful. The world was moving forward, and they had a choice to make. They could either choose to move with it or be left behind. Though no one spoke in response, The air around them seemed to shift. Slowly, quietly, the change began. It wasn't grand or loud. It wasn't a royal announcement or a dramatic speech. It was a moment of quiet realization that something was happening. A subtle shift, like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness before the world fully wakes. The monarchy that everyone thought they knew, unshakable, bound by tradition, was already beginning to bend and transform. Not through trumpets or ceremonies, but through a simple letter, shared in the quiet of the night, and a truth that had been set in motion, with Catherine unknowingly at its heart. And what came next? That part of the story was bound to leave everyone stunned. As the next morning's light slowly crept over London, it was shrouded by heavy gray clouds that hung low over the city. The weight of the atmosphere seemed to mirror the tension building within Buckingham Palace, where a secret meeting was about to unfold behind closed doors. There would be no public announcements, no press present, just those who were trusted, who carried the weight of decisions that had never been so urgent. The air in the room was thick with expectation, as though it had been charged with the weight of centuries. And then, the first figure arrived, Princess Anne. She did not look like someone on the verge of starting a royal revolution. Instead, she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone on a mission. Her expression was focused, calm, as though she were preparing to carry out the most important task of her life. Clutched in her hand was a simple leather folder, but within it lay a letter, one that would shake the very foundations of the palace. Next, King Charles entered, his expression as controlled as ever. But those who knew him well could see the subtle strain around his mouth, the tightness in his eyes. His composure was intact, but it was clear that the weight of the situation was not lost on him. Following him was Prince William, every inch the poised future king. Yet behind his serene blue eyes, there was a fire, quiet, intense, but undeniably there. This was the moment, the turning point, the decision that would set everything in motion. Anne wasted no time with formalities. She walked straight to the table and placed the folder on the polished wood. The room fell even quieter, and in a voice that left no room for doubt or disagreement, she spoke. The message she had to deliver was not hers, nor Charles's, nor William's. It was the Queen's. Her final wish, a wish that would redefine the future. Anne's voice carried with it the weight of history, the knowledge that what was being said could never be unsaid. The decision, now in their hands, was not a choice about what was expected. It was a choice about what was right. Everyone leaned in, eyes fixed on the Queen's elegant, careful handwriting. And her message couldn't have been clearer. Catherine, yes, the same Catherine who wasn't born royal, was the future. It wasn't about blood anymore. It was about heart, about strength, about who had what it took to carry the crown through whatever came next. The Queen hadn't tried to officially change the line of succession. She knew it wasn't that easy, but her letter left no doubt. She wanted Catherine to be more than just support for the next king. She wanted her to be queen in her own right. The room erupted. Whispers, shock, tension thickening with every word. Then, bang. Charles slammed his hand on the table. "This is madness," he snapped, his voice unsteady. "I thought last night was just a moment, a bit of emotion. You can't rewrite the entire monarchy with a letter." Anne met his gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. "Mother wasn't confused," she replied. "She was certain." And then William spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was raw. "What about me?" he asked. "What happens to everything I've been raised to be?" Anne's expression softened, but her answer stayed firm. "You're still vital. You're still needed. But if the monarchy is going to survive, it has to evolve. Mother saw that. She hoped we'd see it too." William looked down, fists tight in his lap. It felt like a punch to the gut, like everything he'd prepared for was slipping through his fingers. But deep down, he knew. He'd seen Catherine face storms that would have knocked him flat. He'd watched her win over the public without ever trying to. She didn't chase fame. The spotlight came to her, and she never let it burn her. Maybe, he thought bitterly, she'd been the real queen all along. Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. No press releases, no big announcements, just business as usual. But inside the palace, a storm was quietly brewing. Catherine, blissfully unaware of all the drama, just kept doing what she always did, visiting children in hospitals, comforting grieving families, fighting for mental health. Every smile, every kind word, every cause she supported stitched her even tighter into the vision the Queen had imagined, the future she'd quietly passed on. But inside Buckingham Palace, the pressure was rising. The tabloids started whispering, rumors of secret meetings, strange tension among the royals. And through it all, Anne stayed solid, like stone. She didn't waver. She knew the truth now, and there was no unknowing it. The clock was ticking. It was only a matter of time before the whole world caught up. For hundreds of years, Buckingham Palace had stood as a symbol of tradition that never bent, never cracked, never budged. But after Queen Elizabeth passed, those cracks began to show. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Charles now wore the crown, but somehow it didn't sit on him the way it had on her. Not quite right, not quite complete. Charles's reign may have been expected, but it wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. People still respected the monarchy, sure, but loving it? That was another matter entirely. Charles, for all his deep passions and thoughtful ideals, often found it difficult to become what his mother had been to the nation: steady, stoic, above the fray. The weight of his past, his rocky divorce, the long, complicated road with Camilla, had never quite faded from the public memory. The crown gleamed brightly, but the man beneath it? He stumbled more often than he soared. Now Prince William, on paper, had it all. The charm, the youth, the stability. He was the royal the younger generation could relate to, the heir with just enough normalcy to seem modern. But the truth? That image came with a crushing weight. Every step he took was watched, every word measured, every small slip was amplified. Even his love story with Catherine, arguably the brightest jewel in the royal crown, cast its own shadows. The more the public adored her, the more difficult it became for William to be seen for himself, as more than just her husband or the Queen's grandson. The love for her was genuine, but at times, it made him feel like the spare to his own spotlight. And then there was Harry. Across the ocean, his voice echoed with pain and accusations. The bombshell interviews, the tell-all memoirs. His words sliced through already fraying bonds, deepening cracks that had barely started healing. Every headline hurt. Every silence between brothers grew louder. William knew, perhaps better than anyone, that the monarchy was no longer standing on firm ground. It was teetering, on memory, on duty, on hope. For a brief moment after the Queen's death, something rare happened. The country seemed to come together in shared grief. People gathered, people mourned. But grief is fleeting, and unity is fragile. It didn't last. Polls painted a worrying picture. More and more young people began to ask the big question: does the monarchy even matter anymore? In places like Australia, Jamaica, and other parts of the Commonwealth, the calls to step away from the crown grew louder and more confident. The royal family felt it, even if no one said it out loud. The tide was shifting. The loyalty that once felt unshakable, it was slipping away, one wave at a time. They all knew it. No glossy press event, no royal documentary or balcony appearance could fix it. What they needed was real, authentic, human. Someone who didn't just represent tradition, but redefined it. Someone like Catherine. And somehow Queen Elizabeth had known, long before the cracks showed, long before the whispers turned into headlines. She had made her decision quietly, away from cameras and crowds. She hadn't made a royal decree or tried to upend centuries of protocol, but she had made it known to those who mattered. When the time came, the ones who truly loved the monarchy would understand her vision. She had seen what others had missed. She had looked into the future, and it had Catherine's face. Not because she was born to rule, but because she embodied something deeper: hope. And now, here's where the story starts to truly twist. While Anne's revelation was still echoing through palace walls, another truth was causing sleepless nights in the House of Windsor. Support for the monarchy wasn't just softening, it was slipping through their fingers. King Charles, unable to find comfort, often stayed up into the early hours, flipping through ancient texts and royal histories, searching for guidance from kings who ruled through upheaval. But answers were hard to find. Prince William carried the burden differently. It sat in his chest like a stone, cold and constant, especially when he looked at his children, their faces still bright and full of faith. He wanted to believe he was raising them for a future steeped in honor, tradition, and service. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he wondered, what if that future never came? Catherine, though, met this shifting world in her own quiet, graceful way. She didn't panic. She didn't posture. She simply accepted the truth. The world was moving forward, and it wasn't waiting for Buckingham Palace to catch up. It was Catherine's calm, her ability to stay grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning, that made her stand out. She had no thirst for power, never chased the throne. And maybe, just maybe, that was the very reason she was the one the crown needed the most. She hadn't chased the crown, but now the crown was beginning to chase her. To the public, everything still looked perfectly royal. Grand ceremonies, polished portraits, glittering gowns. But under the surface, something was shifting. Quietly, steadily, like tectonic plates. A slow-moving fault line had begun to build pressure. At the heart of it all was a truth too delicate, too dangerous, to speak aloud. The monarchy's picture-perfect image was far more fragile than anyone dared admit. And the House of Windsor, built over centuries with tradition and expectation, now stood right at the edge. The world was watching, holding its breath, wondering, would it all fall apart? Or could it somehow rise again? Not through laws or titles, not through bloodlines alone, but through the quiet, solid strength of a woman who had never asked to wear the crown, but who might wear it better than anyone who ever had. So what happened next? That's where things start to get even more unbelievable. Because as the old saying goes, nothing stays hidden under the sun forever. The Queen's secret wish? It didn't stay locked inside the palace. No, thanks to a few watchful palace maids who had been quietly listening and observing behind the scenes, it was about to slip into the world. And once the secret was out, there was no turning back. She didn't need to shout to be heard. When Catherine and William briefly split, she handled it with quiet grace. There were no angry interviews, no dramatic statements, just dignity. And something changed during that time. She grew stronger, more self-assured. A few months later, they found their way back to each other, and when they did, their bond was even stronger than before. Their long courtship hadn't been easy, especially for Catherine. The public had a magnifying glass on her every move, and the tabloids, ever hungry for drama, dubbed her Weighty Katie. But through it all, she stayed calm. She never clapped back or tried to prove herself to the press. Instead, she simply stayed focused. On William, on her future, and most importantly, on staying true to who she was. Then came November 2010, and the world finally got the news it had been waiting for. The engagement was official. Catherine, elegant and poised, stepped into royal life fully, going back to her full name as she prepared for a very different future. On April 29, 2011, millions tuned in from every corner of the globe as she married Prince William in a wedding filled with tradition, love, and global fascination. She became the Duchess of Cambridge that day, stepping into a role lined with centuries of expectation. But Catherine didn't get swept up by the pageantry. She kept her feet firmly on the ground, bringing warmth and quiet strength into her new royal life. In the years that followed, Catherine and William became something new, a fresh version of the royal couple. not distant or untouchable, but modern, engaged, and present. Together, they welcomed 3 children: Prince George in 2013, Princess Charlotte in 2015, and Prince Louis in 2018. Each royal birth brought excitement not just to the family, but to the world, with people cheering for the young family from afar. Through every stage of motherhood, Catherine remained steady. She didn't vanish into her role or lose herself under the royal spotlight. She balanced it all: her growing family, royal obligations, and a deep dedication to charitable work. She made it look effortless, even when it wasn't. Catherine's story quickly became proof that wearing a crown wasn't what made someone royal. It was the way they carried themselves, the way they served others, and the heart they brought to the role. But this was just the beginning. As the years went on, her presence evolved. She was no longer just the poised duchess in tailored coats and wide-brimmed hats. She became a driving force, a woman using her platform for change. She didn't just attend royal events to tick boxes. She threw herself into causes that truly mattered to her. Her charity work grew into one of the most defining parts of her identity. It wasn't just about shaking hands or ribbon cuttings. It was real, deep, purposeful. And one of her most touching acts didn't even make headlines at first. Quietly, in 2018, Catherine decided to donate 7 inches of her hair to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that makes wigs for children battling cancer. No press release, no photo op. Inspired by her hairstylist, Joey Wheeler, she made the choice privately, a quiet reminder that the purest kindness doesn't come with cameras flashing. It was a simple act, but it echoed everything she stood for. Some critics insisted that moments like these were all for show, but they weren't. Because long before she ever wore a tiara, Catherine was already doing the work. In 2007, long before wedding bells and royal titles, she organized a photography exhibition to raise money for UNICEF. That same year, she hosted a quirky and fun charity roller disco, managing to raise an impressive £100,000 for Oxford Children's Hospital and mental health programs. Her early visits to children's hospices made a lasting mark on her and shaped the direction of her future royal life. After becoming Duchess of Cambridge, her efforts only deepened. She didn't just talk about change, she invested in it. Just a few months after her wedding, she and William created a charitable gift fund in place of traditional wedding presents, directing support to 26 different organizations. It was clear they wanted their union to mean something more than tradition. They wanted it to give back. And when all these pieces started coming together, when people saw the consistency, the heart, the dedication, something shifted. Even some of the skeptics who had doubted the Queen's mysterious decision began to see it differently. They looked again at Catherine, not as just William's wife or the elegant Duchess, but as someone who had quietly earned every bit of the public's respect. But of course, admiration wasn't the end of the story. With Catherine rising so steadily, so naturally, a new question began circling behind palace doors and among royal watchers alike. What did this mean for William? How would he truly feel, watching his wife step into a role he had been trained his entire life to fill? And even more unsettling, what would happen if the crown began to look more like hers than his? William had always known pressure. It had lived with him since he was a child, shadowing every step, every smile, every carefully worded statement. But nothing had prepared him for this. For the moment he realized that the future of the monarchy, in his grandmother's eyes, might not rest on his shoulders, but on his wife's. The revelations surrounding Catherine weren't a betrayal, but they left behind a quiet ache, a wound he didn't know how to patch up. He loved her deeply, fiercely in fact. He admired her calm, her inner steel, and the effortless way people were drawn to her. But admiration didn't stop the creeping question that had begun to grow inside him. If Catherine was the crown's hope, then what did that make him? For years he had played the part perfectly, measured, respectful, restrained, always mindful of what was expected. He had worn duty like armor, trying not to crack under its weight. And now, here was Catherine, never trained, never rehearsed, standing exactly where the world needed her, simply by being who she was. That thought both moved him and shook him. He didn't resent her, not even for a moment. Instead, he found himself looking at her with something deeper than love. It was awe, laced with a kind of reverence, and yes, even fear. She hadn't chased power. She hadn't tried to prove anything. And yet she had captured the imagination of the public, the quiet loyalty of those within the palace, and perhaps most importantly, the confidence of Queen Elizabeth herself. The Queen had watched monarchs rise and fall across decades. She had known storms and scandals, public adoration and sharp criticism. She didn't make decisions lightly, and for her to see Catherine as the best hope for the crown, it meant something. It meant everything. For William, that truth left him spiraling through doubt. Had he been too guarded, too afraid to shine, too burdened by the need to be perfect, to be what everyone else wanted? He didn't have answers, only questions, and the sense that the path forward had changed, even if no one dared say it out loud. But amid the quiet palace tension, something even more unexpected happened. All eyes turned to Catherine, expecting her to accept or decline the Queen's wishes with simple grace. Most assumed she'd say yes. After all, how could anyone refuse the Queen's dying request? But Catherine, true to form, chose her own way. She didn't rush. She didn't smile and nod politely, just to please others. When asked if she was ready to take on that immense responsibility, her answer wasn't what anyone expected, not even Charles or William. She answered softly, but with firm clarity. She said that while many may wish to lead the monarchy, every wife first wishes to keep peace within her own family. And for that reason, she needed time. Time to think. Time to weigh everything. Not just the glory or duty, but the personal cost. Her response stunned them. It silenced a room full of people used to instant decisions and formalities. Because in those few words, Catherine showed exactly why the Queen had chosen her. She wasn't dazzled by power. She understood the gravity of it. And she was already doing what great monarchs must, balancing the enormous weight of national expectation with the fragile threads of family loyalty. So no, she hasn't given a final answer yet. But one thing is now certain. The Queen hadn't made a wild, romantic choice. She had seen something the rest of the world was only just beginning to understand. Catherine wasn't just a duchess or a wife or a mother. She was a woman who could look power in the face and pause, reflect, consider. That strength, that wisdom, that's what made her the right choice. So now we ask you, what did you make of her answer? Was it cautious or courageous? And how do you think William and Charles felt in that moment? Relieved, unsure, maybe even shaken? Most of all, what do you think of the Queen's choice? Did she see the future more clearly than any of us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And for more fascinating royal insights, go ahead and click the next video. You won't want to miss it.